You get home exhausted, toss your keys onto the counter, and sit in silence longer than you planned to. The TV is off. Your phone keeps lighting up beside you, but you ignore it for a moment. And in that quiet, something uncomfortable starts creeping in. Your mind drifts back to people you should have forgotten, conversations that ended weeks ago, emotions you thought you had already moved past. You replay everything like your brain is searching for an answer that no longer exists. And the frightening part is, this no longer feels unusual to you. Most people today are emotionally overloaded, but spiritually empty. Their minds are constantly attached to noise, validation, old pain, and emotional chaos. They think raising their vibration means becoming more positive, more attractive, more successful. But Stoicism teaches something far more difficult. Your life does not transform when you add more to it. It transforms when certain things inside you finally die. The need to be understood, attachment to suffering, emotional reactivity, toxic connections, the old identity keeping you emotionally trapped. Because some versions of you are costing you your peace. 1. Your need to be understood must die. You're driving home after work, replaying a conversation that should have ended hours ago. At first, you tell yourself you're just thinking things through. But 10 minutes later, you're still stuck in it. The tone of their voice, the way they looked at you. That moment they misunderstood what you meant and suddenly treated you like someone you're not. And now your mind is trying to fix it. You imagine what you should have said differently. Maybe if you explained yourself more clearly, they wouldn't have reacted that way. Maybe if you had stayed calmer. Maybe if you had chosen better words. So later that night, you grab your phone and type out a long message you probably shouldn't send. You rewrite certain parts 3 times. You remove sentences so you don't sound emotional. Add new ones so they fully understand your intentions. And the entire time, one thought quietly controls you. I just need them to understand me. Most people never realize how exhausting this becomes. Not physical exhaustion, emotional exhaustion. Because when your peace depends on being understood by everyone around you, your nervous system never truly rests. Your mind becomes trapped in constant emotional negotiation. You start managing perceptions instead of protecting your inner life. And modern life makes this even worse. Everything now encourages performance. Social media, relationships, work culture. Everyone is explaining themselves all the time, carefully shaping how they appear to other people. Even silence feels dangerous now. If someone pulls away, you immediately feel pressure to fix the misunderstanding before it grows. So you over-explain. You send paragraphs instead of boundaries. You reopen conversations that should have stayed closed. You keep trying to clarify your heart to people who already decided how they want to see you. And this is where Stoicism enters like cold water. Because Stoicism teaches something most emotionally overwhelmed people do not want to hear. Not everyone misunderstands you accidentally. Sit with that for a second. Sometimes people misunderstand you because the version of you inside their mind benefits them more than the truth does. The confident version of you threatens insecure people. The peaceful version of you frustrates controlling people. The version of you with boundaries disappoints people who were comfortable accessing you whenever they wanted. And once you understand this, something shifts internally. You stop treating every misunderstanding like an emergency. That is real freedom. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And nowhere is this more obvious than in the exhausting need to constantly explain yourself. Some people spend years mentally arguing with people who are no longer even present in their lives. You see it in small moments. You stare at your phone hoping someone responds differently. You rehearse imaginary conversations while brushing your teeth. You mentally defend yourself to people who never asked for clarification in the first place. And slowly, without noticing it, your emotional state becomes dependent on external interpretation. That is one of the fastest ways to destroy your peace. Because the moment your identity depends on controlling how other people see you, your mind becomes fragile. Every cold reaction feels personal. Every distant tone feels threatening. Every misunderstanding feels like a judgment of your worth. But Stoicism reminds us of something powerful. Your peace was never supposed to live inside someone else's opinion of you. And maybe the hardest truth of all is this: some people are committed to misunderstanding you because clarity would force them to confront themselves. A manipulative person benefits from making you feel guilty. An emotionally immature person benefits from simplifying who you are. Someone losing control over you benefits from pretending your boundaries are cruelty. That is why endless explanation rarely creates peace. It usually creates deeper emotional dependence. At some point, maturity begins to sound less like convincing and more like quiet confidence. You stop rushing to defend yourself. You stop panicking when someone distances themselves. You stop writing emotional essays trying to save every connection. And strangely, the less desperate you become to control perception, the calmer your energy becomes. Because your mind is no longer performing for acceptance. It is finally standing on its own. And one day, you realize something that changes the way you move through the world forever. The people who truly value you rarely require endless explanations to see your heart clearly. Everyone else was asking you to abandon your peace just to earn temporary understanding. 2. Your attachment to old pain must die. You're cleaning your apartment on a quiet Sunday afternoon when you suddenly find something you forgot you still had. Maybe it's an old photo, a message thread, a sweatshirt, something small, something meaningless to everyone else. But the moment you see it, your mood changes. And just like that, your mind travels backward. You remember who you were during that period of your life. The conversations, the disappointment, the version of yourself that stayed awake overthinking everything. You tell yourself you've already moved on, but deep down, something still pulls you back toward the pain like it's unfinished business. So instead of letting the moment pass, you sit there feeding it. You revisit old memories. You replay what they did. You imagine what closure would have sounded like. And without noticing it, your mind slowly starts reopening a wound your spirit was trying to close. This is the strange thing about emotional pain. The mind does not always want peace. Sometimes it wants familiarity, and that realization changes everything. Because many people are not emotionally trapped by what happened to them. They are trapped by their attachment to revisiting it. Stoicism teaches that suffering itself is not weakness. Pain is part of being human. Betrayal hurts. Rejection hurts. Losing people hurts. The Stoics never denied that. But they also understood something most people spend years avoiding. If pain becomes your identity, healing starts to feel like a threat. That is why some people unconsciously hold on to suffering long after the event itself is over. Not because they enjoy being hurt, but because the pain became emotionally familiar. It gave structure to their thoughts. It shaped how they saw relationships. It became part of the story they tell themselves about who they are. You see this everywhere once you notice it. Someone keeps checking the profile of a person they claim they're done with. Someone listens to songs that reopen emotional wounds every night before bed. Someone says they want peace, but keeps mentally returning to the exact memories, destroying it. And maybe the hardest truth of all is this: sometimes you are not trying to heal anymore. You are trying to keep the emotional connection alive through suffering. That is why letting go feels so terrifying for certain people. Because once the pain disappears, they no longer know who they are without it. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed by the color of its thoughts. And if your thoughts constantly live in old resentment, old heartbreak, old anger, eventually your entire inner world begins to take the shape of those emotions. You stop experiencing the present clearly. New relationships become contaminated by old betrayal. New opportunities become filtered through old disappointment. Even peaceful moments start feeling uncomfortable because your nervous system became addicted to emotional tension. And modern life quietly encourages this. People romanticize suffering now. They turn heartbreak into identity. They wear emotional damage like proof of depth. Entire personalities get built around who hurt them, who abandoned them, who failed them. But Stoicism asks a brutally honest question. Who would you become if you finally stopped feeding the wound? Not ignoring it, not suppressing it, not pretending it never mattered, but no longer building your emotional life around it. Because there is a difference between remembering pain and emotionally living inside it. And many people never notice when memory quietly becomes self-destruction. At some point, you have to stop reopening old doors just to confirm they still hurt. That is not healing. That is emotional captivity. Real healing begins when you stop needing your suffering to explain your identity. You stop checking if they regret losing you. You stop replaying the betrayal while driving alone at night. You stop turning loneliness into proof that something is broken inside you. And slowly your energy changes. Not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because your mind is no longer constantly traveling backward. That is one of the deepest forms of freedom Stoicism offers. The ability to exist in the present without being emotionally chained to the past. And maybe the most painful realization of all is this. Some people from your past are no longer hurting you. Your attachment to the memory is. The event ended a long time ago, but your mind kept extending its life. And once you finally understand that, something inside you begins to loosen. Because you realize peace was never waiting for an apology. It was waiting for your permission to stop carrying the pain forward. 3. Your emotional reactivity must die. You're having a normal day when suddenly one small thing changes your entire emotional state. A text arrives with a colder tone than usual. Someone interrupts you during a meeting. A stranger makes a disrespectful comment online. And even though the moment itself lasts only seconds, your mind keeps carrying it long after it's over. Now you're replaying it while making coffee, replaying it while driving, replaying it while trying to fall asleep. You imagine what you should have said, what you wish you had done differently. Maybe you even start creating imaginary arguments in your head where you finally win the interaction. And the strangest part is, your body reacts as if the danger is still happening. Your jaw tightens. Your chest feels heavy. Your nervous system stays activated for hours because one emotional moment managed to take control of your inner world. This is emotional reactivity. And most people do not realize how much of their life is controlled by it. Stoicism teaches that external events are not what destroy your peace. What destroys your peace is the speed at which your mind surrenders itself to emotional impulses. That is why emotionally reactive people often feel exhausted, even when nothing dramatic is happening in their lives. Because they are constantly fighting invisible emotional battles inside their own head. One negative interaction ruins the entire day. One moment of rejection becomes a week of overthinking. One small inconvenience triggers frustration far beyond the situation itself. And over time, the nervous system starts living in survival mode, always scanning, always anticipating conflict, always preparing emotional defense mechanisms before life even asks for them. You can see this everywhere now. People react instantly to everything. Instant anger, instant offense, instant emotional conclusions. Social media made this even worse. Everyone is reacting before thinking. People argue with strangers they will never meet again. Entire moods get destroyed by comments from people who know nothing about their real life. And slowly, emotional chaos starts feeling normal. But Stoicism offers a completely different kind of power. Not domination over other people, domination over your own reactions. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you always have the option of having no opinion about something. That idea sounds simple at first, but it becomes life-changing once you understand it deeply. Because most suffering is amplified internally. The event happens once. but the mind repeats it 100 times. That repetition is where emotional exhaustion is born. And maybe the hardest truth of all is this: some people know exactly how emotionally reactive you are. They know what triggers you. They know what tone changes your mood. They know how easily your peace can be interrupted. And consciously or unconsciously, they begin controlling your emotional state through your reactions. That is why uncontrolled emotionality quietly destroys personal power. Every impulsive reaction gives the outside world access to your nervous system. You see this in relationships all the time. Someone ignores you for an hour, and suddenly your mind creates 10 different stories. Someone changes energy slightly, and now you feel anxious the entire evening. Someone criticizes you once, and you mentally defend yourself for the next 3 days. The event ends quickly, but your emotional reaction keeps extending its life, and eventually you realize something uncomfortable. Your peace is not being stolen, it is being surrendered. This is why Stoicism places such importance on the pause between stimulus and response. That pause changes lives, because inside that pause your freedom still exists. Before the angry message, before the impulsive decision, before the emotional outburst you regret later. Most people believe emotional control means suppressing feelings, but the Stoics never taught emotional numbness. They taught awareness. The ability to observe emotion without immediately obeying it. That is real strength. Not becoming emotionless, becoming difficult to emotionally destabilize. And ironically, the calmer you become internally, the more clearly you start seeing other people. You notice who thrives on provoking reactions, who subtly manipulates emotions, who only feels powerful when they control the emotional atmosphere around them. But now something inside you has changed. You no longer react instantly. You no longer rush to defend your ego every time life touches it. You breathe longer before speaking. You think longer before responding. And slowly your nervous system stops living like every moment is an emotional emergency. That is one of the deepest forms of freedom a human being can experience. To feel emotion fully, without becoming controlled by it. And eventually, you realize something most emotionally reactive people never understand. Calmness is not weakness. It is the refusal to hand your inner world over to temporary emotions. 4. Your attachment to toxic people must die. You leave a conversation feeling drained again. Not angry, not devastated, just heavy. The kind of heaviness you cannot fully explain. Maybe it happened after dinner with someone who constantly makes subtle comments disguised as jokes. Maybe it was a phone call where you spent an hour listening, comforting, understanding, only to realize they never once asked how you were doing. Maybe it was someone you care about making you feel guilty for setting the smallest boundary. And somehow, even after all of that, you still feel bad for pulling away. That is how toxic attachment often works. It rarely begins with obvious destruction. It begins with slow emotional erosion, a constant leaking of energy, a quiet abandonment of yourself in order to maintain connection. Stoicism teaches something modern life desperately tries to make people forget. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your mind, your energy, or your emotional availability. But many people struggle to accept this because they confuse attachment with loyalty. So they stay. They stay in relationships where they constantly feel anxious. They stay around people who only reach out when they need emotional support. They stay loyal to versions of people that no longer exist. And over time, something dangerous happens. They become more committed to preserving the connection than preserving themselves. You can feel this happening in small moments. You hesitate before speaking honestly because you already know the reaction you'll get. You mentally prepare yourself before seeing certain people. You notice your mood changing depending on whether someone gives you attention or distance that day. And slowly, your nervous system begins organizing itself around another person's emotional unpredictability. That is not love, that is emotional captivity. And the frightening part is, Many people mistake this emotional instability for deep connection because chaos creates intensity. The highs feel addictive. The reconciliation feels meaningful. The inconsistency keeps the mind emotionally attached. But Stoicism asks a difficult question. Why are you calling it connection if you constantly lose yourself inside it? That question changes people. Because once you truly sit with it, you begin noticing something uncomfortable. Some relationships survive only because one person keeps sacrificing their peace to maintain them. And maybe you have done this more than you realize. You tolerated disrespect because you feared loneliness. You accepted inconsistency because you remembered who they used to be. You kept explaining your needs to people who benefited from ignoring them. And eventually, exhaustion became your normal emotional state. Marcus Aurelius warned against becoming emotionally shaped by people lacking discipline or character. Not because he believed we should hate others, but because he understood something timeless. Energy is contagious. Spend enough time around manipulation, emotional instability, constant negativity, or selfishness, and eventually your own inner world starts absorbing it. That is why some people feel emotionally tired all the time without understanding why. Their spirit is constantly adapting itself to unhealthy environments. And modern culture romanticizes this constantly. People glorify ride or die loyalty even when the relationship is destroying them. They call self-abandonment compassion. They call emotional dependency love. They call endless second chances maturity. But Stoicism sees things differently. A peaceful life requires boundaries, not angry boundaries, not dramatic exits, quiet boundaries. The kind where you stop forcing access. The kind where you no longer explain your worth repeatedly. The kind where distance becomes an act of self-respect instead of punishment. And one of the hardest truths you will ever accept is this. Some people only loved the version of you that had no boundaries. The version that always answered immediately, always forgave instantly, always tolerated disrespect, always made emotional space for them while neglecting yourself. But the moment you begin protecting your peace, they suddenly call you cold, different, difficult, selfish. Not because you became cruel, because you became less controllable. That realization frees people. Because now you stop trying to earn healthy treatment from emotionally unhealthy people. You stop chasing closure from people committed to misunderstanding your boundaries. You stop shrinking yourself just to maintain emotional access to someone who keeps draining your spirit. And slowly, something inside you becomes calmer. You no longer feel obligated to save every relationship. You no longer confuse guilt with love. You no longer panic at the thought of distance. Because for the first time, your nervous system is no longer surviving on emotional chaos disguised as connection. That is real peace, not having everyone stay, but no longer abandoning yourself to keep them. And eventually, you realize something that changes the way you see relationships forever. The people who truly care about your well-being will never require you to destroy your inner peace in order to keep them close. 5. The old version of you must die one day. You wake up and realize your old life no longer fits you. Not dramatically, not all at once, just quietly. You notice it in small moments first. The conversations that used to excite you now feel empty. The people you once chased no longer impress you. Certain habits begin feeling heavier than comforting. You go out less. You spend more time alone. Your tolerance for noise, drama, and emotional chaos starts disappearing. And for a while, this change feels confusing, because part of you misses the old version of yourself. The version that laughed louder, wanted more attention, needed constant connection. The version that ignored red flags, reacted emotionally, and chased things that looked exciting instead of peaceful. And even though that version of you was exhausted most of the time, it still feels familiar. That is what makes transformation so difficult. People think growth is about becoming someone new, but often growth feels more like grieving someone you used to be. Stoicism understood this deeply. The Stoics knew that peace requires sacrifice, not the dramatic kind people post online, the invisible kind, the painful internal separation between who you were and who you are becoming. And most people avoid this stage entirely, because identity death feels lonely before it feels liberating. You see it happen when someone starts changing their life seriously. They become quieter, more selective, harder to emotionally manipulate. They stop reacting to everything. Stop chasing every distraction. Stop needing constant validation from people around them. And strangely, not everyone celebrates this transformation. Some people become uncomfortable when you evolve, because your growth quietly exposes the patterns they are still trapped inside. It's why the old version of you fights so hard to survive. Not because it was healthy, because it was predictable. The human mind would often rather stay attached to familiar suffering than step into unfamiliar peace. And maybe you have felt this yourself. You decide to become more disciplined, then suddenly crave old distractions again. You start protecting your peace, then feel guilty for becoming distant. You finally stop chasing unhealthy relationships, then feel lonely enough to almost go back. Not because you are weak, because transformation creates withdrawal. You are emotionally detaching from an identity your nervous system spent years memorizing. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes shaped by repeated thoughts and repeated actions, which means your identity is not built in one moment. It is built through repetition. That is why your future cannot be reached by repeating the emotional habits of your past. And this is the part nobody talks about enough. The old version of you will try to convince you that growth is arrogance, that boundaries are selfish, that discipline is boring, that peace is loneliness. Why? Because the old self wants survival, not evolution. You see this clearly the moment you begin changing seriously. Suddenly, temporary pleasure loses its grip on you. Mindless distraction feels emptier. You stop romanticizing people who constantly disturb your peace. You become more intentional with your energy. And at first, this new version of you feels unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. Because chaos used to feel normal. Now silence does. That shift changes everything. And slowly life begins feeling lighter. Not because your problems disappear, but because your identity is no longer built around emotional survival. You stop needing to prove yourself constantly. You stop abandoning your future for temporary comfort. You stop shaping your life around people who only knew how to love the version of you that lacked boundaries. And eventually, something beautiful happens. Your nervous system finally begins to trust you. Trust that you will no longer drag yourself back into environments that destroy your peace. Trust that you will walk away when necessary. Trust that you will choose long-term clarity over temporary emotional relief. That is real self-respect. Not confidence, not appearance, not status. The ability to protect your inner world from the version of yourself that once kept destroying it. And maybe the deepest truth Stoicism teaches is this. Your next level in life will require the death of certain emotional habits, identities, attachments, and patterns that once felt like you. Not because you are becoming fake, because you are finally becoming intentional. And one day you will look back at the person you used to be with a strange mixture of sadness and gratitude. Sadness because that version of you was suffering in ways nobody fully understood. But gratitude because that version finally became tired enough to change. Because some versions of you are not meant to be healed. They are meant to be outgrown. And maybe that is the real meaning of raising your vibration. Not becoming perfect. Not pretending to be positive all the time. Not escaping pain, emotions, or reality. But learning to let go of the things quietly poisoning your inner world. The need to be understood by everyone. The attachment to old pain, the habit of reacting emotionally to everything around you, the toxic connections draining your peace, and finally, the outdated version of yourself that keeps pulling you backward. Stoicism does not teach emotional suppression, it teaches emotional freedom. The ability to move through life without allowing every opinion, memory, emotion, or person to control your state of mind. And the truth is, none of this changes overnight. Real transformation happens slowly, quietly. One decision at a time, one boundary at a time, one moment of self-awareness at a time. So take what resonated with you most in this video and begin practicing it in your daily life. Because peace is not something you find someday in the future. It is something you protect every single day. Thank you for spending this time here with me. And if this video spoke to a part of you that has been emotionally exhausted for a long time, stay connected. There is still a calmer, stronger version of you waiting to emerge. I'll see you in the next video.